The next session is a very, very well-awaited session between Monica Bajaj and Padmasree warrior. So let me introduce Monica first. Monica is a senior technology executive with over 20 years of experience, successfully building and scaling products and global engineering teams. She has worked for many Fortune 500 companies such as NetApp, Cisco, UKG, Workday, and now she's currently serving as the VP of Engineering at Okta. Along with being a technology leader, paying it forward has been her motto. She is an executive sponsor of Women in Okta, and she also sits on the board of directors of Sheeto, focused on women in engineering leadership. Monica holds a master's in computer science from IIT Bombay. I will also go on to introduce Padmasree. Padmasree warrior really needs no introduction, but I'll still try to give a little bit just for people who are new. She is a globally recognized technology leader and entrepreneur. With a career spanning over 3 decades, she has held leadership roles at some of the world's most influential technology companies, including Cisco Systems, where she served as the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Strategy Officer. She is an alum of IIT Delhi. She is currently serving as the founder and president and CEO of Fable. The vision of Fable is to build the world of bring the world of stories to everyone, anywhere, to relax, share, and learn. She is a member of the board of directors of Spotify. My children love Spotify, so I'm glad they would be so excited to see this later. She has also served as a board member of Microsoft, and she is a tireless advocate for women in technology. Welcome, Padma, and welcome, Monica. So just before they get started, I would like to see, having women in IIT is already a rarity. And the memories that people hold are, of course, very, very precious. But our memories are precious and also a little different. So I want to take this opportunity to ask Monica first. Monica, what was it like? What is the one thing that you remember that you'd like to share with the audience today?
So just to give the context, if someone asked me like what was the biggest transformation in your life, and that was going to IIT.
Ooh,
and it still stays in my heart, and it has gone to the point that my kids also know that getting into IIT is a big, big deal.
We should remind them all the time.
And the reason I say this is, before going to IIT, I was like top of the top. I felt like I've got it, and I'll be staying at this. When I went to IIT, the reality really hit me hard, and I was no one. And why I say this is transformational, because it changed my perspective towards life. It was not about grades. It was not about like, hey, you have to be at the top, but it was all about surrounded by smart people and learning from them and have that growth mindset. And kudos to one professor, which I think many of you probably know, and I had the fortune of working very closely with him. His name was Professor D.B. Phatak. And I went to him, and he told me to sit down and said, like, Monica, getting into IIT is like a Mumbai train. You work really hard to get into that train. Just hold on to the railing. Don't worry about anything else. Just enjoy the ride. And then when the right station will come, you will automatically get down. And it just stuck to me. And till today, whenever I'm struggling, I go back to that analogy. And that has been the transformation for me.
Oh, what a beautiful story. Thank you. When they say getting on is the hard part, but staying on is easy, it's not easy.
It is not.
But I'm glad somebody simplified it for us like that. So I would like to ask you, Padmasree, do you have a memory you would like to share?
I think there are plenty of memories, right? All of us have been at IIT. Definitely, I think it's a very humbling experience. All of us get in, like you said, thinking we are the smartest people on the planet, and very quickly on registration day, you realize you're not. I think that sense of humility, I think, is very important when you're working in the tech industry, because things are constantly changing. One can never know anything. But to me, I think the biggest learning has been the power of belonging in a community. When I went to IIT, there were only 5 IITs. Now there's many, which is great. More people can have access to a wonderful education system. But when I went to IIT, there were only 5 IITs. There were very few women. In my class, there were only 5 women in a class of 250. So I hear the ratios are much better. The deans always tell me that, the directors always tell me the ratios have improved quite a bit. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I think some of you who've graduated more recently probably know the truth more. But when I went, there were very few women. I think for us, what I learned, it was really important to belong and support each other. So the 5 of us in engineering, we were in different disciplines, but we stuck together, we supported each other. I think the reason I'm here today is to belong to a network and belong to a community where we help each other, where we advise each other is so important. That's really stayed through my whole life. My company is really about building micro communities. That's a great memory. I actually met my husband in IIT as well. So what are the odds? I think there were 5 women in a class of 250. We've been married for over 4 decades, and we were classmates at IIT. So I have very fond memories of IIT.
Cool, thank you. Well, let's give them a huge round of applause and get their session started. Thank you.
Well, great to see you, Padma, again. Padma and I had opportunity to do a fireside chat a couple of months back, and so I know a lot more about Padma now. So that's good to hear. So we'll start with this a famous quote by Wayne Gretzky, who is a famous Canadian hockey player. He said that skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And that's where we are here today, about talking about decoding the future. We are at the forefront of innovation. Lots of technology changes are happening, but I strongly feel, as we heard from the previous keynotes as well, if the technology is not making a human impact on our society as well, then in my opinion, that technology is not of use. Because at the end of the day, that's where the game changing happens. It's how we shape it with an armed insight. How we understand it, how we apply it to our humanity is very key. So to begin that, like in your roles as a CTO at Motorola and CTO at Cisco, you had several opportunities to look forward, like, decoding the future, as we say. What was the crystal ball behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know in tech there is no crystal ball. I think the only thing that we know is technology changes constantly, and it changes everything we thought we knew, right? I think it's really important to be a very curious learner and continue to learn. I think sometimes we don't anticipate the negative outcomes of what a technology could do, and we maybe realize too late. Social networks are a great example of that. It was started with the intent of connecting us as humans, and it's now become where there's quite a lot of toxicity that happens on these platforms. I think the one thing that I always used to talk about in my role as Chief Technology Officer, Chief Strategy Officer, actually all of us, how many of you work in the tech industry developing technology? A lot of us, right? I think our job is to try to look around the corner. So thinking about what are the precursors for change, I think that's what I focus on. When you're looking at a trend, it's almost too late. A trend means something's already happening, things are moving. So in a way, you're sort of looking behind in the rearview mirror. So I always look at what are the precursors, some things that are signals to things that are about to change in a big way. Sometimes when you see a signal, there's a lot of hype around that. I think AI is in that phase where the progress has been so tremendous, in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. It's like, it's not new as a field. Academics have been working in this area for years and years, but I think what we've seen is that it's now much more accessible to what we can do. And because of that, there's a lot of excitement. And with excitement, there's a lot of hype. And so I think one of the things we need to do as technologies is separate the hype from the possibilities. And I think, to me, a biggest job a chief technology officer, a chief strategy officer does is actually that. How do you separate possibility from hype? Meaning, where are things that you feel are exaggerated in the types of applications we'll see, and where do you see some real impact, right? And this actually, I know Ashish said there's a lot of venture capitalists here. Sometimes they get it wrong too. They chase hypes, and I think you end up making the wrong calls or wrong investments. And I think, to me, that is the biggest thing we need to pay attention to. And the possibilities, how do you decide what is a possibility, what is a hype? If you hear now, the whole rhetoric is, okay, AI is going to replace human beings, it's going to take over all creativity, there's not going to be any writers anymore, there's not going to be any artists anymore, there won't be any poets anymore. I don't believe that. I think human beings are great creators of stories in what we say to each other, how we narrate something that's happening, how we create a great piece of art. Why is Shakespeare still read after so many years? You would think that would be dead, right? Why do we still like literature like that? It's because it's so powerfully written, and that writing comes from our own experiences, our own emotions, as the previous speaker was saying. So I think it's not the role of AI. We shouldn't think of it as, oh, it's going to replace humans. I think the possibility is, how does it make us actually better? How does it take inefficiencies out of what we are doing? How can it help us do things we haven't done before, like Firoz was saying? Can we communicate in a different way rather than just using verbal languages? I think that is the power of the technology, and I think, to me, quote unquote, I don't know if it's crystal ball, I think there is no such thing, but a way of anticipating the precursors of changes is to think about what are the possibilities with that technology that we can implement in products and create businesses around that.
So you made a good point about possibility versus hype, and I think that's something we all should always be looking, because it's very easy to fall into that trap of the hype part. How does your thought process changes as the technology changes happen, or things around us, like, COVID happened, technology changes happen? How do you think, in your role now as a CEO at Fable, the framework, the thought process, how do you reframe it?
Yeah, I mean, I always look for what problem are we trying to solve. It shouldn't be technology for the technology's sake, right? I think, as Dr. Green was talking about technology solutionism, we think technology is a solution for everything. It's not necessarily. It can become a good tool for something. The reason I started Fable, I think maybe some of you know, some of you may not know. I had a great career as a corporate executive. I was running a huge team at Cisco. I had 26,000 engineers globally. Maybe some of you worked somewhere in my team with me before. I left all that to start Fable. Essentially, I went from Cisco to a electric car company that was China-based, and we were using a lot of AI and ML for automated driving, which is an interesting problem to solve as well. I think if you're an engineer working in an EV automated driving space is like being a kid in a candy store. Every discipline of engineering is used, and it's a very fun thing to do. But I was driven by something deeper. I just felt like machine learning, data, AI, all of this could be useful more directly to help us as human beings. So I left NEO to go figure out that space. And in the beginning, I was looking at very complicated things like computational radiology, computational pathology. How do we help use AI for cancer detection? And as I was researching that space, I kept coming across a lot of data that was talking about how mental wellness is on the decline worldwide, right? So not mental illness, but wellness. By the way, wellness is more than the absence of being ill, right? It's being healthy. And wellness mental wellness, things like anxiety, stress, depression, loneliness, I think as Firoz was saying, it's now, by the way, declared as an epidemic by the Surgeon General of the United States. People now call depression and anxiety the second pandemic in the world. So, this is all rising, and we think it's like doesn't happen to us, but it happens to all of us. It affects every age group, every income level, every part of the world you're living in. Money is not the solution for everything. Of course, there are some structural issues that aggravate it, domestic violence, financial hardship, etc. But on an average, it affects all of us as human beings. So that caught my interest. And I was thinking about, back to your question about how do you separate possibility from hype, I was actually fascinated by that problem, and I started to study the physical fitness industry, which is now over a $5 trillion industry worldwide. 20 years ago, it was a pair of sneakers and pumping weights at a gym, right? Like if you thought about physical fitness, you thought about either you had to be a runner or a bodybuilder. It was not really accessible for an average person, including myself. I thought fitness was not for me. Fast forward now, there's just so many options you can choose to do. We now have devices that tell us whether we walk 10,000 steps or not. And that whole movement started with a very simple thing like walk 10,000 steps a day. It's not going to cure cancer, but it's definitely a wellness thing that we could all do, we could all measure with something simple to measure and follow. So I was looking for, is there an equivalent of walking 10,000 steps a day for mental health and mental wellness? Today, if you look at mental wellness, the comparison I make to running and bodybuilding in the case of physical fitness, in the mental wellness case today, it's like meditation and therapy. Yeah, definitely they're effective, but not accessible to a lot of us. Meditation's not that easy to do. And I came across a lot of neuroscience that talked about how stories, reading or listening or watching even a story is really good for our mental health. So I kind of honed in on that problem. How do we build communities to read stories, discuss stories, share what we've read? That led me to starting Fable. Just recently, it's 4 years. By the way, starting a company is super hard. People always ask me what is harder, being a corporate athlete and leading large teams in a big corporation or starting something. Any founders in the room? Okay, I share your pain. So it's very hard to start a company. I've been at it for now 4 years. We just crossed over 1 million users. Actually, last 3 months, we're getting a lot of users from Southeast Asia, which actually warms my heart. We get a lot of users from India as well. We just passed, we are now number 4 in the App Store, so please support us. And I think there is science now that says if you read 30 minutes every day consistently, all other things being equal, you live 2 years longer. So that's sort of how I arrived at that problem. And I felt like there is a possibility here of using AI and ML to make recommendations, hyper-personalized recommendations of helping you find a book or a TV show or a movie that you're going to really like. Because reading a book is a time investment, right? It's not so much like listening to a song even, and I'm on the Spotify board. It's a 3-minute investment. If you don't like the song, you swipe and you move on. But a book typically takes a month for an average reader to finish. So how do we help you find the exact thing you're going to like? This is a problem AI can really help us solve. Not replacing the writers who are writing those books, but helping you find the great writers that you will like. So that's a way that in my own head I separated the possibility.
So that's a very good example, because storytelling will never go away. I mean, storytelling, everybody, we all use in our roles, no matter where.
According to Hollywood, by the way, it's going to go away, but yeah.
No matter where we are in our careers, what roles we are playing, we are doing storytelling every single day to ourselves, to our teams. So I think this is really important. But I want to switch a little bit. Like, we talked about data is involved. AI is involved, security is also becoming the most important thing. So I view this as a triangle, and being a security professional, I always feel that AI and security, like you need security in AI and AI in security, both are needed. So what are your thoughts? Because when I look at the security part, I'm looking at you need a data security, you need a model security, you need infrastructure security, and then you need human in the loop security as well. So what are your thoughts around that? And obviously, when you are dealing these things at Fable, How do you handle this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We need to build in, I mean, security and privacy, by the way, and they sort of go hand in hand, but they're also separate.
Yes.
I think both are important at every part of the stack. Everything from data collection, which is the input. How are you collecting the data? Is that done ethically or not? Are you asking people's permission? Who owns that data? How do you secure the data once you collect? So there is the input part. And how you treat that data, how do you tag that data, what metadata are you using, then the algorithms that you're building on top of the data, the models that you generate, the applications layer on the stack. Security is really important at all of that, along with privacy. So I think we need to think about both. In our case, for example, we always build with Fable, the approach we take is the user owns the data. They have the option of importing or exporting the data with wherever they go, whichever app they choose to use. I think you have to take that approach, right? I think this we learned the hard way in the last decade with all of the social networks and the data ownership issue. On the security side, you're actually more an expert than I am. I'd like for you to answer that question.
So basically, the way we look at it is like we are leveraging data for all the users, like the users log in. So we do a lot of like data minimization. Basically, we don't collect the least amount of data when the user is entering the data by logging in. I mean, Okta is into authentication and authorization both. The second thing we do is providing least privilege access from an authorization perspective. We also make sure that the models which we are leveraging to do the security piece are also hardened with lot of synthetic data so that they are ready, like when the data poisoning happens, we are ready to handle that. So those are really, really important things. Data governance is really important. Constant data cleaning is important because redacting the data is extremely important for us. That's where it starts. And then other part which is last is the human in the loop, which is more about explainable AI, that we should be able to tell the users that why we are collecting the data and what we are going to do with that data. So with that, other piece is also making sure like data retention, because a lot of times, a lot of companies want to make sure like how far you can retain their data and what all you can retain. That is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think the one thing, by the way, that requires a lot of work, and I hope some really smart people who are here in the audience will start companies to approach this problem. AI is very good at imitating humans, right? It can mimic human voice. How many of you have played around with the voice assistant that ChatGPT has just released? I think you have to be a subscriber to get it, but as a free user, you get some access. It's pretty amazing. I think it now is really evolved to where it sounds like a human. Laughter is something it still can't do. It still does ha ha he he. I think it doesn't really, I think goes back to the discussion from the earlier speakers about emotion, how it captures emotion. But as it becomes really, really good at mimicking a human voice, mimicking an even human image in audio and video, how do we detect what is fake and what is real?
The deep fake part.
Yeah, deep fake is really a hard, difficult problem, I think. In some ways, as technology progresses, it also becomes difficult to create the security boundaries around that. And so we really need some smart people to tackle that.
We talked a lot about technology. Let's shift the gears towards people. As an engineering leader and throughout my career, we all have seen people are the biggest element. No matter how good the technology is, you need to have the right people for the right things. And how do we build that entire ecosystem is like when it comes to, they help us decoding the present, they help us decoding the future. That's why people are the biggest element of it. Like 5 years back, if you were not working at Google's or Facebook's or now Meta or Netflix, you won't be getting a job in AI. And I remember like way back undergrad, this is like years back, I did my undergrad in natural language processing. And that was a thing. And wherever I went for jobs, it was like, oh, it's more of a research, nobody cares. And I was like shocked, and I had to pivot. to get a job into a different discipline. And fast forward, my question to you is, how do we make sure that the workforce is prepared? Like when these new technologies are coming, we are not scrambling to get people on board, and every company is like becoming .ai to find AI people, or everybody is doing some curriculums and say like, oh, I'm an AI expert. How do you see that we can prepare our workforce much in advance for these forward-looking technologies?
Yeah, I always say when you're hiring, don't necessarily hire from the best schools. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say at an IIT conference, but that's really true. I think hire people that are very curious, that want to learn, that are eager to learn, that are open to learning. Because I said, we don't know. I think things are changing so quickly. To your point, I think Silicon Valley's strength is also our weakness. Our strength is being able to identify things early, and we create opportunities. But our weaknesses, then we kind of whitewash everything with that, right?
Yep.
Like it was mobile before, then it was social, and then it was ad-based revenue. Now it's AI. Every company has something to do with AI. Unless you have AI in your company, you don't get money from VCs.
Exactly.
You don't get a job unless you have something about AI on your resume, which is all the bad thing. I mean, that goes back to the hype bucket, not the possibility bucket. I think to me, the possibility of preparing your workforce is like making sure your teams are agile, they're willing to learn, you're willing to learn if you're leading engineering teams. I always used to say when I was CTO at Cisco, my job is not to know all the answers, my job is to ask the right questions. Because you can never know as a technical leader all the answers. No one knows, by the way. If they tell you they know the answer, they're wrong. I think they're just full of ego. I think you have to be humble enough to say, I don't know, but I know what the right questions are to ask, and I'm expecting my team to go learn those and come back. So hiring people who are very curious, I think is an important thing I look for. When I hire people in my startup, for example, I don't necessarily look at the companies they worked for. Actually, many people who worked at some of the companies you've mentioned struggle in a startup because you have to be resourceful, you have to hustle, you have to like figure out how to do a lot with very little. I think if you're a startup, you have maybe 10, 20 engineers. How do you get them to do many, many things? I think that's a very different skill. I think as things are changing, even big companies, that's a skill you need. Being resourceful, being curious, how do you know what you don't know? Being self-aware. I think those are the traits I look for when I'm hiring people. I ask questions, I think in interviews, asking people, where have you failed? What have you learned from that failure? What can you apply from that? I think this is something we all learned in IIT, right? Like I got my first B grade in first year IIT or second year IIT. I was shocked, like what, you get Bs too? That never happened to me in my life. I learned a lot from that. It was if you went to IIT Delhi back then, there was a professor called Dumir. He was a very, very tough professor, gave us questions, and it's almost like a torture. He gave us take-home questions that he knew none of us could solve. So it was sort of like a very, I think, humbling lesson. You learn, like you fail at certain things and you think you are the best and you're not. What do you learn from it? How do you apply? I look for those kind of traits, and I think in preparing your workforce, you have to keep instilling that thing about like, hey, even in a company, you have to be able, even big companies have to pivot, right? Like I was on the board of Microsoft for a long time. They had to pivot from who they were, Windows-based company to cloud-based company. And so that's something that Satya and team did really well. That all requires us to be nimble as humans and having the ability to adapt as well.
You mentioned a good thing, like the hardest part in IIT was like open book tests. I could never figure it out.
Yeah, did you all have Monday quizzes, by the way? When I went every Monday, we had a quiz in IIT. No? Okay, I'm dating myself.
So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the theme here. Like when it comes to decoding the future, what does it mean personally to me? Like the way I look at it is, how did I decode the future so far in my career? And I'm still learning. One was, of course, doing hard things, some things which give you, like, makes you feel uncomfortable, but you have to fit in and you have to be comfortable doing this. So that's one. The second part is obviously being consistent in it, which has really helped me. How do you see in your journey so far? Like, what has been the rule of 3 for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always talk about this. I always say my whole career has been about change, right? Like, I started my career, I'm a chemical engineer. I did chemical engineering at IIT Delhi. Then I did my master's in polymer science. I started my career in the semiconductor industry. The first chapter of my career was in semiconductor industry. I became CTO for Motorola Semiconductor. Then I switched careers and I went to the system side and became CTO for the corporation, all of Motorola Corporation. Went to learn large systems, small systems. Mobile was, at the time a cell phone. Kind of did that, and then I made yet another career change, moved to Silicon Valley to work for Cisco, kind of like, that was at the merging of mobile and internet. Until then, mobile was different from the internet. Back then, we used to actually call it mobile internet. We now don't. It's like become the same. And then from Cisco, I went to build electric cars, completely different. And now I'm building a consumer community and discovery platform, something very, very different. Majority of my users on my platform are Gen Z. They all come from TikTok. So it's a very different generation I'm building the products for. So I always say that making sure you're moving around. The best time to leave a job is when you're doing well in your job. I always tell people, don't get comfortable in the job you're at. When you're doing really great in your career, that's when you should move and go to a different career, because A, people will want you because you're doing well. And so you'll be able to negotiate a better salary for yourself. And secondly, you learn something new. I always say move to a job where 70% of the content and 30% is new. So you're learning and adding and not taking too big a risk and failing. So making sure you're making those transitions in your career is something really important as you decode the future, because otherwise you'll be stuck. You'll be stuck in an industry that's going to get obsolete. You'll be stuck in a company that may not change. So I think people always ask me, when should I leave? Actually, leave when you're doing well, right? That's when you leave. The second thing I say is hiring great people. I think surrounding yourself with the great people. I think to decode a feature, again, like I said before, you don't know all the answers. I think making sure you're part of groups, whether it's in your own company, people you're hiring, or taking the time to go have coffee with somebody who's working somewhere else. Maybe it's even your competitor. It's like that informal networking where you pick people's brain. I always do that to this day. I meet with my peers around the world, whether on board members in completely different industries. Somebody could be in a retail industry. What are they seeing? What are they seeing change? I think it's really important to have that. Take your blinders off. Don't just stay in your swim lane. Take the time to go talk to people who are working banking industry, financial industry, real estate, what is changing, how is it changing. These things are important, right? Because to your point earlier, society is also changing very quickly, and so it's important that we are plugged in. I think that to me is the second really important thing as you decode the future. I think the third thing is really taking responsibility for yourself. Are you working on something that is having a positive effect on somebody else? Even if it's 1 or 2 people, is it having, like, we have users on Fable, and I said, like, majority of our users are Gen Z users. They post comments like, oh, this is the safest place on the internet. This is the coziest community platform. That touches my heart, and it makes my day. I think you should make sure you're working on something that is touching somebody else's heart. I think those 3 things I would say are important as we all set about figuring out what the future is.
I think you made a good point and it's important for this group, because I feel sometimes, I have been in the Valley and I moved from India here years back. Being in the Valley, sometimes we are in a fixated mindset thinking that this is the box and this, if you don't do this, you are a failure. But the reality is there is much more beyond that. I have 2 kids. Both my husband is here in the audience. My husband and I both are in tech, but my kids, both of them decided that we want to be more creative. We want to do something where it touches the human heart. And we let them go, with that approach. So it's a blessing. They keep us on track, I would say. So it's really important to think about that. And we had the keynote earlier also that anything you do in your daily life, like empathy, compassion, communication, is really the key for weaving this thread across the humanity.
No, I'll
That's
give you a
really
very
important.
practical example. You know, Fable, we suddenly noticed we were getting a lot of users from India, and you know, they're now it's actually our second largest user base. Then I got a random message on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn, and you know, it's one of those, my LinkedIn, you have to, something, I'm a influencer or something, you have to get my permission to follow me or something. So this person sent me one of those special messages. She's from India, and she said, I've been on your platform for 2 years. I don't think you're doing everything right for the Indian audience. Here are all the things you're doing wrong on your platform. On your product. It's very much based for Silicon Valley and US, and I feel very sad. And she wrote this really long note. My first instinct was, okay, somebody who's not happy. I was about to ignore it, and then I actually took the time to read it. And then I gave her my email and said, email me, and she did. And I said, okay, what would you do to fix things? How would you make it better? Come back with some ideas, and she did. And you know, turns out she's just 3 years out of college. She's one of our users. But you know, I think if I had been arrogant and thought like, what does she know? I've been working in the tech industry for 40 years, and I'm in Silicon Valley. I had a big job in all these companies. We immediately hired her. And
that was my question, actually. Did you hire her?
I told my team, hire her. She's so awesome. She's got all these ideas, and she's like hit the ground running, and our growth is really taken off. I think that goes to my point earlier about like never assume you know everything. You're not the user of what you're building. Somebody else is using your product. I think you have to put yourself in that user's shoes. You know, it's sort of like reverse mentoring. She's now telling me everything about, because I never worked in India. I never, you know, I left India after I graduated. So it's very arrogant to think you know the market that you are not in, right? And so people there know that market. So if you're building products that are being used globally, take the time to listen to people from those markets.
This conversation would not end without a rapid fire, and Padma doesn't know what I'm going to ask her, so let's see how it goes.
Okay.
So first question I have is, what are the biggest challenges you see in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges I see is, as one of the speakers mentioned, the dehumanizing with technology. I hope that doesn't happen. I'm an optimist with technology, but I also know the dangers of sometimes what we can create. So that's my biggest fear.
Okay. If you could change one thing about the world, what it would be?
Same thing, similar theme. By the way, I'm an artist. I love art. I love music. I love dance. I would change the world to not just reward I guess I would change the world to reward the intangible things that we can do with our creativity.
Okay. What's your biggest fear and why?
My biggest fear is spiders. I hate spiders. Recently, I think in California, it's unavoidable. I was reading an article that said if you hate ants and spiders, move to Iceland. So I'm considering that.
What's your #1 life hack that keeps you focused all the time?
I'm a huge list maker. I have a lot of hobbies, I have a lot of interests. I believe in making lists not for myself. I make lists for my husband, I make lists for my son, I make lists for my friends. So yeah, I think to me that's my hack. If it's not on my list, it doesn't get done.
Okay. My last question. If you were a superhero, what it would be?
Wow, I know this is always hard. I think my superpower, you're asking what superpower I want, right?
Yep.
The superpower I would want is to travel, time travel. It doesn't need to be permanent. I think even if I'm just there for a brief moment, there's just so many, I think I would travel more to the past rather than the future. I don't want to know what the future looks like, but I definitely want to be in places and times that have gone past. So, yeah.
Well, it was great. This conversation was great, and I hope you all got to know Padma more. Well, thank you, Padma.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.